Wray. I'd like to take you back to the FBI's role in the Kavanaugh background investigation, if I may. There were 2 letters that were sent to you by law firms in that time frame. One pointed out that the Federal Bureau of Investigation, I'm quoting the letter here, declined to interview witnesses whose names we provided to the FBI as possessing information highly relevant to the allegations. And the other referenced agents meeting with a witness whose counsel then, quote, provided the FBI with a list of more than 20 additional witnesses likely to have relevant information. And that letter actually attached an affidavit from a very apparently credible person who had been at college at the time, was currently an emergency room physician, and so forth. And evidently there was no follow-up on that either. I'd like to ask those 2 letters to be made a part of the record. We also experienced on this committee considerable difficulty in finding out where the point of entry would be to the FBI for information. I've been a U.S. attorney. I work closely with the FBI as Rhode Island's Attorney General. I have never known the FBI to be fending off information before. So this was a very novel and peculiar circumstance in which witnesses weren't being interviewed and in which, when we asked to find out where the point of entry was for information, there was none, apparently. You were asked to provide committee confidential contact information for an FBI agent to whom members can send credible contacts regarding individuals seeking to be interviewed. Did that ever happen?
Well, Senator, I don't remember all the specifics of that particular background investigation, but what I will say, you referenced your prior experience as U.S. Attorney, and of course we've talked about that before. I think it's important for people to understand that there's a fundamental difference between a background investigation and the kinds of criminal investigations or even counterintelligence investigations the FBI does every day.
Yes, as you
A background investigation is something that we do in a completely different way as an investigative service provider to a client agency. In this case, it would have been the White House. And I, having
as you testified to Senator Harris in the Homeland Security Committee, our supplemental update to the previous background investigation was limited in scope, and it was limited in scope by the White House. That's correct?
I also testified, I did testify to that, and I stand by that testimony. I would also say, though, as I recall, I also testified that I consulted at length with our security professionals who are specialists in background investigations to make sure that that investigation, that background investigation, was done consistent with our longstanding policies, practices, and procedures for background investigations, where the scope, it's not unusual for the scope to be limited.
So here's my hypothesis. You don't recall whether you responded to this letter by seeing to it that there was an FBI agent to whom members could send credible contacts. I don't believe there was, because I was trying to vector information to the right place, and every door we turned to closed or said, no, go to that door, and then that door closed or said, no, go to that door. The ultimate upshot, it seemed to me, was that the FBI established a tip line. And if people wanted to bring in information, they were told to call into the tip line. Now, I've tried to find out what the protocol is for dealing with tip lines. And I would ask that, as a question for the record, you provide me whatever is relevant to the standard operating procedure and practice for the FBI with respect to the treatment of tip line information when it comes in. Would you be willing to do that?
I'd be happy to provide you more information about tip lines.
Thank you. What I did find was an FBI video that describes how tip lines work when it comes in through the FBI's FBI.gov interface. The first step, it says, is that it comes into the Public Access Center unit at FBI headquarters. Analysts will vet them. They'll review them for believability, credibility, check internal databases and external databases to verify the information is a valid tip. Can you vouch that those steps were undertaken with respect to the Kavanaugh background investigation tip line?
What I can tell you, Senator, is that I spoke specifically with the people responsible for the background investigation, who are career professionals specializing in background investigations, not to be confused with criminal investigations or counterintelligence investigations. And I was assured repeatedly that they felt comfortable that the way it was being handled was consistent with our practices, procedures, and longstanding approach.
There hadn't been a tip line before in a background investigation ever, had there?
I don't know the answer to that.
Okay, I don't think there was, so it's hard to say that it's consistent with procedures. Here's what the procedures apparently are. Another one is every single tip is looked at by at least 2 individuals who have independent quality assurance checks. Do you know if that procedure was followed with respect to the Kavanaugh investigation tip line?
Well, Senator, I would again come back to the answer I gave, which is I expect that background investigations, which are different, fundamentally different from criminal investigations and counterintelligence investigations,
but you don't
were
know.
being conducted in a way that the professionals who specialize in this area felt comfortable.
But you don't know whether or not the tip line procedures were followed. With respect to
I'm
the
not
tip
familiar. I don't have the document in front of me that you're looking at. I haven't talked specifically about that. So
Then it says, once a tip is determined to have further investigative merit, a supervisor would actually review the tip, and at that point, it gets vectored into electronic systems for further processing. And I guess if you're not familiar with whether that supervisory step took place either.
what I am familiar with is the assurances I've received.
I got it. Yeah, no,
Right.
I heard that.
Okay.
I'm just trying to ask something more specific. And the last is every single piece of information that's submitted by an individual is reviewed by FBI personnel at FBI headquarters. And again, you can't vouch for that having taken place with respect to this tip line.
I can't speak to that specifically.
Got it. Okay. You know, here's my concern, and I'll be perfectly candid about it, and you can answer however you want in questions for the record to allay my concerns. But it looked to me like every time somebody went to try to get an FBI agent to take information, they got fended off, and that the tip line actually became a tip dump into which information was dumped and never, ever reviewed for credibility and was not treated with the protocol that the FBI has announced that it usually handles with tip lines. So I'm happy to continue this conversation. My time is up right now, but please, I think that's a legitimate question to ask, and I hope that in answers for the record, you'll be able to compare the protocols that the FBI uses for tip lines with the way in which this particular tip line was handled by the FBI. And I do understand that you treat these differently and that they don't follow ordinary procedure. But ordinary procedure is a fairly reasonable benchmark, and I'm interested in finding out how close the FBI came to it in this particular tip line.
Well, I'd be happy to see if we can provide you more information as follow-up to your questions. Again, I would say that ordinary procedure, to use your phrase, there's ordinary procedure for criminal investigations and counterintelligence investigations. Ordinary procedure for background investigations is something different, in my view.
Couldn't agree with you more, and once we agree on what the facts are of what took place, we can have a discussion about whether or not that met standards of kind of basic responsibility. Thank you.
Okay.
Senator Sass.